I should be talking to you some of a species which is very often, till around 1990s, later part of 1990s, the word was not current at all, the diaspora. And we have borrowed it specifically from the Jewish community. And today it has become quite popular that we have people outside one's own place of origin, one's own country, and yet connected back with the motherland. This is the group which we call as the diaspora group. And Indians have been very, very active in crossing the boundaries, and we have a fairly large collective of Indian community overseas. It has been estimated to be about 25 million Indians outside. And they are found in almost 110 countries, and there are about a few countries. Yeah, we have about 15 countries which have 50,000 plus population of Indian presence in these countries. Some of the countries like Mauritius, Trinidad, Guyana, etc., they have a considerable percentage of Indian population, ranging from 20 to 40-45%. In Trinidad, in Guyana, etc., we have about 30 to 45% of Indian population there in those countries. So we have countries where people have made significant contribution, but their percentage may be 1.5 or 1.6. The Indian present in the US, for instance, is about 1.6 million as estimated today. But then there are visible minority making waves, and they have been earning perhaps much more than the national average in terms of their income. So today when we talk about the Indian presence outside, and specifically because of the certain inroads made in certain kind of industries like software companies, their presence is felt, and you find them much more widespread than they were about, say, 20 years ago. Today you find there's no country where Indian presence is not found. And I mentioned that Telugu presence is much more than the presence of any other Indian there. It's almost like the recent estimate. It's only the estimate. Nobody has really carried out a survey and knows about it. It's an impressionistic. 1 in 3 is a Telugu person in most of these countries, whether it's in Europe, UK, or in, say, in US, for instance. US, the percentage has gone much more in the recent last 2 decades or so. So, how many Indians have been migrating to different places, to different continents? The first phase of migration was indentured labor. They were we call them as coolies, or they were called as coolies by the British those days, and they were taken to different continents, like sheep, for instance, put them into ships, and they didn't know where they were going to. And most of these groups were uneducated. They only put their thumb impression on the contract in which they signed. That's what is called indenture. Indenture is on a contract basis. They were taken out of the country. They lived perhaps a similar kind of life that the slaves had led earlier than them, because the locations which slaves have vacated were to be filled up by labor, indentured labor, and specifically these are to the colonial islands where we had a lot of plantation labor. Indians had plantation labor, and that's the first stream. The next is the one which we find today in Europe and in the North Americas. The literate, educated, urban, middle class professionals and the scientists, etc., who are migrated to, say, for the US from 1950s onwards, after India's independence. That is the second stream. And this is the one which always said took flight to go to these countries, to their destination of work, whereas the earlier ones went by ship. So the distinction made between Jahaji Bhai and the ones who were migrated later, and the ones who were migrated later, we generally refer to them as NRI diaspora, because they went to those countries as NRIs first and then gradually settled down in those countries, getting the citizenship. So one of the points of diaspora is that somebody has completely rerouted elsewhere in a country where one is not born, and you get the citizenship of those countries. Otherwise, we call them only as NRIs. Now, in the third phases of 1970s and 80s, we have a large number of population going to the Middle East with the oil boom and so on. So these people are still, they remain only as NRIs because they cannot become the diaspora. They cannot be rerouted in those countries. They won't get citizenship, so they have to come back to India. So this is the third phase, and the fourth one is, of course, in the recent days from 1990s onwards to the present day. You find every day a stream of people. Any airport you go, you find a large number of people migrating to distant destinations all over the world. It may be to the African continent, to the US continent, or though the preference is to go to the developed countries. US is the #1 destination today. The recent study showed Australia has become another destination for the Indians to migrate, where conditions of work are much better. You have a better prospects to go ahead with migrating to these countries, and the trend of migration is never ending. I recall the statement made by Jagdish Bhagwati, who was one of the very distinguished Columbia University economists, who had been an advisor to the presidents of US, etc. Mentioning about migration, he said, you cannot stop migration because many countries need migration, right? Young, skilled professionals, etc. they require, and today you need lots of people who can provide services even at home, the nursing service. Today, I think the great demand is for the nurses, for instance, who are trained in India. And you don't need doctors because doctors won't get visas easily. You will get, if you're a nursing professional, you will get a visa much easier. So there is a control of the migration process on the basis of what is needed by a society, by a country, and it's a selective migration process. So you cannot contain, but you can control it in some way that it helps you to develop your own domain. So the diaspora is very closely connected with migration, international migration, and migration is connected with development. Now, anyone who goes from here contributes in some way or the other for the development of the countries where they have migrated to. And as mentioned, in many of the communications, newspapers, etc., the NRIs have been the cream of Indian society, and when they migrate, they move away. We have a brain drain. I think today, the 21st century globalization process has made us realize that the world is small. It has shrunk immensely. Both time and space have been shortened. You have any place, any time, you can move around, and you have a connectivity with each other. So the 21st century today, we have a greater connectivity. The result is those NRIs who have gone out can easily be brought back, either in terms of the knowledge that they share, because all those who have moved to these developed countries, who are in some of the best institutions, they would be periodically visiting our country. And whenever they come, treat them, get them the resources back to you. So there have been a number of new schemes taken up by the government of India to deal with the diaspora. India did not recognize its diaspora till around 2000.